Everyone. I'm Carl Brandt. I'm the chair of this year's University Challenge Committee. So on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for participating. Unfortunately, this will be our third year in a row of not having an in-person event, but we continue to try to adjust, and I think we're making some steps this year to provide what we think is going to be a great experience for all the teams. Our first ever virtual site visit, so welcome. Obviously not real typical for a real estate competition where you'd normally like to walk the site and actually see and touch things, but we're adjusting to the new normal, and I'm sure we'll be able to get to where we need to be. Today we've allocated about an hour for the Zoom call, so just kind of keeping us on track and on time. I'm just going to run through an agenda quick and then some housekeeping items. I think we just kind of ran through a roll call of all our teams, so I think we're in good shape of someone represented from all the schools. Just a few housekeeping items before we kind of jump into our site visit. We are going to record the call, and so we'll be able to get the link of this recording out to all the contacts at the school, so that you'll be able to share that with people who aren't in attendance, and you're certainly willing to rewatch this if you'd like to. Paul is our guest from the city of Minneapolis. He's going to give us an overview of the site. We'll have some time for questions. With this group, you could certainly use the chat function of Zoom, type in questions, and we'll try to get to those at the end of the presentation, or we may have time for people to shout out questions as well. And then we'll try to save a few minutes at the end of the call as well. If you've got questions about kind of how the general program is going to work, we'll try to answer those kind of at the very end. So we're excited about our site this year. This property is one that's been, I think, long discussed in the Twin Cities market. It's got great potential for redevelopment. As you'll learn, the city has been able to gain control of the site, which has long been a goal of the city. And then obviously with the civil unrest this summer along Lake Street and the increased attention to the submarket, this has become an even more high profile site for redevelopment in the Twin Cities. So I think this is going to be a great site for the teams this year. To get us going, Eric Haupt from Ackerberg Development will just do a quick introduction of Paul from the city of Minneapolis, and he'll give us a historical context of our site. So Eric, you want to take it away?
Of course, there's barking as soon as I come off mute. Apologies about that, but yeah, it's, as Carl said, it's a wonderful site, and I just wanted to say a big virtual round of applause or thank you for Paul for graciously donating his time to be with us today to kind of give us a little bit of color on the city of Minneapolis's desires to gain control of the site, reconnect Nicollet Avenue, and then further densify the site with some sort of future development. So without further ado, Paul is the manager of community planning at the city of Minneapolis, and we'll hand it over to you, Paul, to give us just a high-level history of the site.
Thanks, Eric. It's great to be here and to see all of you. I appreciate the invitation and appreciate that you've chosen Lake and Nicollet for this competition this year. I'm excited to see what comes out of it. I'll introduce myself. As Eric mentioned, I'm the manager of community planning at the city of Minneapolis. So our job is to do long-range planning for the city. We're fresh on the heels of our Minneapolis 2040 comprehensive plan, which is a big change to the way we do long-range planning in the city of Minneapolis and the way we envision our future and the way we regulate development. So I'll talk about that in a moment. I've been involved with the effort to reopen Nicollet for about 9 or 10 years now. And as Carl mentioned, we're at a really important milestone now in that project. So I have not prepared a presentation, but what I've done is I have a bunch of resources brought up on my computer that I can talk through with you all, and then I'll try to be brief, and I'm hoping we can leave as much time as possible for just Q&A with everybody. So somebody tell me if you can't see a picture of Snyder Drugs in front of you. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep talking. So here we are in summer of 1972. This is, I know we have folks from all over the upper Midwest on the call here, so people are going to have varying levels of familiarity with South Minneapolis. But here we are standing on Nicollet Avenue looking north to Lake Street and north of Lake Street. If you're familiar with that intersection, you will see nothing that remains today in 2021. Here in 1972, we have some fine-grained urbanism, and it does not look like that today. So this was, Lake and Nicollet was among the last of the urban renewal projects in Minneapolis, holding over from the 50s and 60s. This was determined to be blighted, and the entire area was cleared, and so this is all gone. And the intent was to, at the time in the 1970s, was to start trying to compete with the suburban retail development that was taking place. And so there were grand plans for this to be an entertainment hub for South Minneapolis that did not come to fruition for a number of reasons. And I know you've got some materials in your packet that you can read that will help illuminate the details of that history. But essentially, the city was backed into a financial corner with the debt on tearing everything down, and needed to come up with a way of needed to come up with a redevelopment that would plug that financial hole. And Kmart came to the rescue, and we ended up with a big box retail store built over Nicollet Avenue, and in the late 70s, Nicollet Avenue was closed, and the Kmart and the Super Value next to it were built. And what you see in this rendering here is essentially what we ended up with and still have today. Obviously, at the time, you can imagine it was a rather controversial thing. I think that the council vote that made this happen was by one vote. Here we have an example of a disgruntled property owner or business owner to the north who was not particularly happy with the way things worked out. His business was cut off by the street being closed. So that's the very, very brief history of how it happened. Obviously, there's a lot more out there about the details of how this went down, but pretty much since the day after the street was closed in the late 1970s, people have wanted it to be reopened. And that the effort to do that, really, there were a lot of false starts over decades, but the current effort really began in earnest in about 2012 with the creation of a work group within the city government to make this happen. And there's a lot, I won't go into all the details of what happened in the ensuing 9 years, but essentially the complex puzzle that was the land ownership and leasing situation here on the site. The city spent years working through that with the property owners and the leaseholder, and the city now, as of June of 2020, has complete site control, both the property and as well as we bought out the remaining lease on the Kmart itself. So it now belongs entirely to the city of Minneapolis. Originally, the plan was to tear down the buildings quickly after the deal closed in June of last year. But with all the events that took place, including the fact that the post office down here at 31st Street, but that was one of the buildings that burned. So the post office needed a temporary home, so we've been leasing that to them in the Kmart building, and we'll do that for the next couple of years while they rebuild. So the building will come down, but while we work on beginning the process of making a plan with the community for the future of the site and the design of the street and surrounding streets, the building will remain for the time being. So I wanted to say a little bit about other things happening that have happened and will be happening in the not too distant future in this area, especially as it relates to transportation, because there is a lot to know. I wish I had a graphic that kind of summarized all this, but I don't, so I'll just talk from Google Maps. The first thing to know is that you can even see it here in this Google Maps image, is that there is a major freeway reconstruction project happening, and as part of that, there is going to be a new bus rapid transit station, a regional bus rapid transit station built in the median of Interstate 35W above Lake Street. So that will be a regional freeway bus rapid transit line that directly serves this area and serves the site with frequent headways going to downtown and to suburban destinations to the south. Another thing that's happening is Lake Street itself. The street is being rebuilt as we speak. If you're familiar with South Minneapolis, you've seen the reconstruction that happened quite a long time ago now, east and west of here. That is happening now to coincide with the freeway reconstruction. Metro Transit, our regional transit agency, is working on plans for an arterial bus rapid transit line down Lake Street called the B line. And there are long-term plans for transit improvements that could include streetcar and or bus rapid transit on Nicollet Avenue itself, as well as in the Midtown Greenway, which runs east and west in a trench just north of the site. The Midtown Greenway, if you're not familiar with it, is a 5.5 mile long bike and pedestrian facility that is grade separated the entire width of the city. So, oh, and a couple more things related to transportation. There is a two-way protected bike lane, or bikeway, being programmed for construction in the next couple of years on Blaisdell Avenue here. There are bridges that need to be rebuilt over the Greenway. This is just kind of the epicenter of a whole bunch of major transportation change that's coming, some of it very soon and some of it more in the long term. And finally, one more transportation note to make is that you can see, obviously, this is a super block. Nicollet, of course, reopening it and rebuilding the street through the site has been the primary goal this whole time. But also, there were changes to the street network that were made back in the 70s to accommodate that street closure of Nicollet Avenue that we shouldn't assume need to stay the way they were back then. When we reopen the street, we need to consider whether we should make additional changes. So there's this little street here, Cecil Newman Lane, that is there so that northbound traffic on the one-way First Avenue can get back over to Nicollet Avenue. And then there's this one-way 29th Street here that southbound traffic uses to get over to the one-way southbound Blaisdell Avenue to get around the site. Those traffic patterns will change, and we need to consider whether reconfiguring those streets up here could provide additional development opportunities. We also need to consider whether we need to, we do need to provide some east-west connections for all transportation modes through the site itself. Okay, so that's the quick thing about transportation. On the development side, obviously just reopening the street isn't the only goal. Getting some intense development here that serves the community is also another primary goal. And that brings us to just what's allowed under land use policy and zoning. In Minneapolis, I'm very proud to say that there is no difference between land use policy and zoning. What you see in the comprehensive plan is what you can build. We've worked very hard to make the development process in Minneapolis predictable so that it's very clear what can be built. The way we've done that is to, in our comprehensive plan, include parcel-specific guidance in 2 layers. One is for future land use, and the other is for built form, the height and bulk of buildings that's allowed. So from a land use perspective, it's important to note that on the site itself, this is in what we're calling the destination mixed use category. So a wide range of uses are allowed: housing, office, commercial, retail. But in this category called destination mixed use, it's one of the few places throughout the city where we actually not only allow retail to be a part of buildings that include other uses like housing and office, we actually insist on it. So any new development that comes here will be required to have active retail on the first floor that faces the streets with these dotted lines. So we need to have retail facing Lake Street, and we need to have retail facing the new Nicollet Avenue. You can see we actually drew the street right through the site in our comprehensive plan. The second layer is built form, and this site is in what we have called the Transit 15 category, which has both a minimum and a maximum height. So we want to prevent underdevelopment from happening in this key area. So there is a minimum of 4 stories for new development, a maximum of 15 stories, although that can be increased up to 20 with some available incentives. So we're looking for intense transit supportive development here at the Lake and Nicollet site. Okay, that was a mouthful. I think I'm done for now. I'd love to pause and hear what people want to talk about.
Paul, Dan from Marquette. You were talking about one-way streets. I'm not clear, and maybe there's something out there that identifies this. Yeah. Are you planning to change streets from one-way to two-way, or is the current direction on the streets intended to stay the same?
Good question, Dan. I don't know the answer for sure. No decisions along those lines have been made. You know, keeping in mind that obviously the street network extends out from here, you know, the implications of making a change like that would extend far beyond this immediate district. For the purposes of a competition, I think, I don't think it's necessary to assume that those stay the way they are.
Paul, this is Carl, but just to be clear, make sure we're correct. I mean, the current Blaisdell on the left-hand side is a one-way going south, correct?
South, yep. And First Avenue is a one-way going north.
First Avenue is a one-way going north. So, yep. So everybody's kind of, everybody's kind of clear on the direction the current streets run. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? I'm Aaron from Loopy Development.
Yeah.
Was asked to help out and be an expert here. Can the students assume that the cost for rebuilding Nicollet will be a cost by the city?
Yeah, Aaron. We've included in our assumptions in our site packet. We're asking, or we're essentially assuming that, yeah, the street is rebuilt. There's no cost to the developer. We're essentially giving the teams 2 blank slate sites to work with.
Okay, thanks.
This is Paula from the U of M. So rebuilding the streets, does that include the public right-of-way or the sidewalks that are adjacent to those streets? And will we have a pretty good, my other question along with that is currently all the egress is off of First and Blaisdell. So I would assume that the city would probably prefer there not be curb cuts through that block. On Nicollet.
Yeah. And your second question, Paula, I think that's a fair assumption. I think that's a fair assumption that, you know, this is going to be the main retail spine, north and south. This should be the, you know, along with Lake Street, you know, those should be the most walkable, active frontages for sure. Your other question about, what was your other question? I'm sorry, Paula.
How much of the sidewalk infrastructure is also, we can assume, has been completed? Like, where does our project?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of where we end up as a city with a, you know, a specific redevelopment plan, which is, you know, a long time out now, I don't know where that's going to end up and who's going to pay for what. I don't know. But I think maybe, you know, if you're just looking for some base assumptions, you know, the right of way north and south of here on Nicollet, I think is 80 feet, inclusive of the pedestrian realm. So you could assume something like that. But, you know, there's been thoughts that if you look at the site, it's larger west of Nicollet than it is east of Nicollet. So I think there's long been an idea that, you know, if you want to extend the public realm and have more room for sidewalk seating and other elements, that would be on the west side, because there's more room to do that without infringing too much on the developable area.
Thank you.
Paul, this is Carl. Just to, what is the typical, what's typical in the city of Minneapolis on if you're taking a site like this? Is it the developer responsibility to put in that sidewalk infrastructure, or is that something that the city would do from a public improvement standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, this just isn't typical in any way.
Yeah, right.
You know, developers often rebuild sidewalks in front of their development just for their own purposes, because maybe it's not in good enough condition. You know, they want the property to be marketable.
Okay.
They might want to widen it for their own purposes. That's a very typical thing. But there aren't very clear and well-defined requirements for a typical development in this from along those lines. And like I said, this is just not typical.
Got it. Yeah.
I think, you know, the public expectation and maybe even our own expectation as a department is going to be, you know, there's going to be a pretty high bar for all elements of this development. I mean, there's going to be a desire for, you know, this is an opportunity, I should say, for the city to really put its money where its mouth is in terms of the goals we're trying to achieve with affordable housing, with environmentally sustainable development, with improving the public realm, with providing transportation options for folks in the Midtown Greenway and transit and biking options, you know, surrounding the site. So, like, this ticks all the boxes in terms of the opportunity. Makes it very, very complicated to achieve, but the expectations are going to be high.
John Schmick here from St. Thomas. There's a fairly large industrial plant across the street, product coatings and things like that, a lot of truck traffic.
Yep.
Has the city addressed whether or not they should stay? I mean, you're looking at a very large, brand new development on the Kmart site, and then you've got this manufacturing plant next door.
Yeah.
Paul, could you point out where we're talking just for?
Can you see my cursor here? It's Nico Products here to the east. The question has been called on that, related to some property takings that were necessary for the. Well, I didn't mention this part of it either. There's a new southbound exit ramp from 35W to Lake Street being constructed that didn't exist when 35W was built, and that required some property takings here that necessitated a change, a reconfiguration to the loading area at at NICO. And that was, so that essentially called the question on whether they're staying. They are staying. The wind goes east.
Well, there are prevailing westerlies sometimes of the year, but there are also prevailing easterlies. There's also 35W right there.
Right.
Yeah. I think that the city needs to be aware that in terms of, well, the city needs to be aware, but maybe the competition, the judges need to be aware that it restricts in some ways what you might want to put on that east side of the property, directly overlooking this particular plant.
Yeah, I agree. That should be a consideration as you consider the site layout and what uses go where.
Right.
That's important.
I would not want to see, I couldn't in good conscience see residential balconies.
Yeah, could you put a street view up of the NICO property?
So this is where the trucks enter. They do not exit here. They exit the other side, but they enter here off of First Avenue.
Are there any known contaminants on the site that need to be addressed? I would imagine it's contaminated.
Well, no, I don't know the answer to that question. I know that investigation has happened. I'm sorry, I can't speak to it.
Carl, Carl, is this a spot to mention the assumptions for how the team should approach such a thing?
Yeah, and again, the site packet, and I'm sure the teams will go through this. It's a good question, Aaron. We had essentially indicated in the assumptions that just assume all mediation, environmental remediation work has been completed by the city prior to the developer taking ownership of the property. So I think our goal here with our assumptions was, and also to kind of be clear, Paul had kind of mentioned earlier the lease with the post office and how long the post office may be in the property. Just to kind of take that off of the table in terms of assumptions, again, just indicating to the teams that assume you're taking control of the property January 2nd of 2022. Which may or may not be reality, but it puts everybody on the same level playing field of what your assumptions should be. And we're also indicating in here as well that assuming that the city has spent a lot of money clearing the site, rebuilding the street. Again, we're kind of making the assumption that the city's not going to be looking at providing any additional financial incentives to development. So kind of asking the teams to try to work this site without those assumptions. So.
Paula here again. On the corner of Blaisdell and the Midtown Greenway, Blaisdell, if that's going to have the two-way bike path, are there any plans? Can we make any assumptions about what the city might do to make better bicycle connections to the Greenway as Nicollet Avenue is opened up?
Really good question. So the existing access to and from the Midtown Greenway in this area is this ramp right here. And this is the access point from Nicollet Avenue here. This is also under the Nicollet Avenue Bridge is a pinch point for the Greenway itself. It is the narrowest part of the Midtown Greenway for folks who are down in the trench. So I know for sure that we will be looking at ways of improving both the access to and from the Greenway, as well as the experience down in the Greenway itself. So the answer to your question is yes, that needs to be improved for sure. And there may be opportunities. I don't want to spoil the spirit of the contest, but there may be opportunities for integrating, what happens here, the development that happens here, with this pretty incredible amenity down here that looks pretty ugly right now. So there are some urban design opportunities there.
Other questions overall for the students, teams, anybody? Thank you.
Street view lets us go down in there too. We can look from the Greenway Trench itself, what it looks like down there.
Are there any constraints about connecting the two properties above Nicollet in a skyway or below Nicollet Road?
Generally speaking, city policy is that skyways are a downtown thing and limited even within to certain areas close to the core of downtown. Looking around the city, you will see that exceptions to that policy have been made over the years, especially in the hospitals area on Chicago Avenue. So I think the focus will likely be the street level and greenway level pedestrian experience as opposed to skyway connections. Underground, I think that's a really interesting question that I'm not sure we've grappled with. I mean, one thought I've had over the years is this is a rare case where this is going to be a completely scraped site, including the future right-of-way. So are there opportunities for underground infrastructure, underground parking that might span the entire site under the future street? So I think those things are on the table.
Paul, do you know if there's any geological impediments to depth? Oh, you could go.
I don't know that, Paula. I don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Aaron, you guys have done some development on Lake Street. What's been your experience on that question?
You're not going to have a bedrock issue here. We just finished our first phase of Lake Street Apartments about 4 blocks west of here. And we're in the ground on our second phase, and then have a third phase scheduled as well. And we have underground parking. There's been no issues. So I would assume that there's not going to be an issue here with bedrock.
Have you done one level of underground, Aaron, or two, or how deep did you?
We've done 2 levels of underground in downtown, but not in these current projects. These are just 1 level underground.
Just one. Okay.
Well, one other question. Is this a big enough site that it's going to require stormwater remediation, special site design that the city's going to want to see?
Yeah, for sure. The current stormwater ordinance requires that at any development an acre or more have a stormwater permit and handle its stormwater on site. That's actually being lowered to half an acre now, but obviously this is far above either of those thresholds.
Carl, for clock management and how it's going in terms of this discussion or other things that might need to occur in the next before the clock expires on this thing, for Paul's attention or yours for the event. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're doing fairly well on time. Questions have been great. Maybe give Paul another minute or so. Appreciate your time again. But if we're kind of wrapping up those questions, if we have specific program questions from any of the team, certainly a NIAP committee and staff can certainly try to answer those here on this call too. So.
I had one question, if that's okay. I was just curious, what's being developed in the surrounding sites that were burned down by the riots?
Okay, so there was a concentration of damage right here on the north side of Lake Street between First Avenue and the freeway. There is a recently approved proposal for a apartment building there. I can't remember if it has retail on the first floor or not, and it doesn't cover all of these properties. This is a series of small properties here. So that's one of the properties. The rest of them, I'm not aware of any concrete plans at the moment. Down here, south of 31st Street, this is a strip mall that sustained damage, but it's being repaired as is. Here, this is a Wells Fargo bank branch that was basically destroyed, and the latest I knew about that is that Wells Fargo was planning on doing an RFP and selling the property for redevelopment. Not sure if they were planning on incorporating a differently designed bank branch there or not. Over here, this is the post office that burned. They will rebuild on site. Can't think of anything else. Anybody else local think of anything else here? Oh, I should say just something to be aware of. I'm sure the contest is probably just on the site itself, but to be aware of that. This is the Whittier Clinic, the Hennepin County Whittier Clinic up here on this entire block. And a detail that might be interesting to know is that the city of Minneapolis owns the southern half of the site where this parking lot is, and could someday in the future develop that. So that's something to think about when you're thinking about, changes to the street network in this area and how development could look in the future.
Another question, how is the southbound 35W bridge going to affect traffic?
Well, certainly having an exit ramp here will, I would imagine, increase the traffic on Lake Street and surrounding streets. Certainly traffic studies have happened in the past, and I'm sure will happen in the future related to the reopening of Nicollet and the development here. Although overall as a city, our vehicle miles traveled are flat. So our population is increasing, our number of jobs are increasing, but our vehicle miles traveled are not increasing in Minneapolis. That's even pre-COVID.
I have a question. You talked about maximum of 15 stories. Is there anything in city ordinances that relates to casting shadows over other buildings or properties?
There is reference to that, but only in the case, only in the case of seeking to go higher. So that 15 stories is as of right. You can build within the allowed building envelope without having to prove that you're not casting shadows.
Carl, Eric, and overall to the team in charge, any inspiring message or how to position this with the groups that the teams will be taking charge of this, taking charge of their proposals. Any messages to leave them?
Words of wisdom. That's a good one. No, I certainly hope this has been helpful for everyone to get a little historical context. And I think our goal here was to provide about as clean a blank slate as possible to teams, to start with. Not a lot of complication to it, but I think Paul's done a great job of kind of giving you a context of what where the city would like to see this go. So I appreciate that, and I think you've been very helpful, Paul. So I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
I just think in interest of time, if you've got if anybody has kind of questions about how the general program is going to work, we're still kind of working through, but we want to do what we can to have just sort of stick with the visual presentations, and that's what our goal is. So happy to take any kind of questions if anybody has any. Otherwise, we'll be able to kind of wrap this up. So. Nothing. All right. As always, for the school teams, reach out. I think you've been in contact with a few of our committee members. Certainly work through them if you've got some questions. We've given you the list of experts. Really happy to have all those guys on. I see a few of them on, including Aaron today. So appreciate you guys joining, and we're looking forward to a great competition. So. I'll open it up for anything else, but otherwise I think we're good to go. So.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.
Yes, thank you. It's for your time. It's been very helpful.
Have a great rest of the week.
All right.
All right.
Great.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. It's great to see folks.